Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Hyperconscious Podcast. Alan, what is hyperconscious?
Once you understand why something is the way that it is, now you have the power to change it. Great conversations with great people and great questions are the keys to the kingdom of unlocking your consciousness.
Every single action that you do starts as a thought. When you control the way you think, you will control the way you act, and you will control the way you live. That is hyperconscious. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another very special, as always, episode of the Hyperconscious Podcast. We hope you enjoyed our latest episode, Scratching the Surface, where we talked about raising your standards and changing your life. Today, we have a very special in-person guest, Mr. Alex Hinkle.
Folks, Alex flew up to the greater Boston area. We got several workouts with him.
We did.
Alex Hinkle is a client of mine. I've been working with him for about 8 months on life, on business, on peak performance, on fitness. He has come such a long way in such a short time. He's 22 years old, but he's a very enlightened cat. One thing that we want to say about this particular episode is that we dig very, very deep.
Oh, yeah.
Out of the PMES, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, we dig very deep into some of the spiritual stuff. This is quantum physics, metaphysics, all that kind of stuff. But don't worry, it's very applicable to your life. Just bear with it.
Yes, I definitely got my mind blown a few times, but in a good way. We always say that getting overwhelmed is one of the keys to growth. So just hang in there, listen, there is a ton of value, and we hope you will enjoy.
Talk to you soon.
Bye. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another very special, as always, episode of the Hyperconscious Podcast. We hope you enjoyed our latest Scratching the Surface episode where Alan and I sat down and talked about how raising your standards will change your life. Today we have a very special in-person guest. I'm going to let Alan tell the story because you guys are tighter than Alex and I am. I don't even know this guy, so...
Oh, okay.
Yes, so welcome. This is Alex Hinkle. He is a client of mine. We met about 7.5 months ago. You snapped me.
Yes.
You hit me up on Snapchat, and I guess you resonated a lot with my content. You wanted to work together. And since then, a lot has happened. So the first thing I want to do is have you dive deep into your story. The first question, how did you get into personal development? Because just to give a little frame of reference to the listeners, Alex and I mastermind every week where I'm coaching him, but sometimes I'm not so sure who's coaching who because he is so next level.
Thank you.
The PMES system was created by, you and I.
Collaborative effort. Yeah,
collaborative effort.
Definitely.
So yeah, go into your story. You told us a story when we were in Florida about when you ran into the book Think and Grow Rich.
Yep.
Think and Grow Rich is a paradigm-shifting book for many people.
Yes.
If you don't know of that book, definitely read it. Kevin's read it.
Yes.
I recommend that to everyone. But yeah, go into that story.
So before I go into the story, I kind of want to start with one of my favorite quotes. So one of my favorite quotes is, life is like a bow and arrow. Your life is the bow and you're the arrow, and it'll pull you back, waiting to shoot you off in the right direction. Steady, aim, bullseye. And so I found this quote, or this quote found me, whenever I was going through the deepest, darkest points of my life. And so that's where I'll start the story. So I was going down my path, and kind of strayed from the direction that I was meant to go. And I ended up finding myself in a place with some bad people in a worse way. And eventually what happened was I ended up getting a DUI at the age of 19. I was underage. I had a fake ID, all these sort of things, right? So that brought me to my rock bottom. And once I got to that point, I realized that there's nowhere to go but up. And this is whenever I started diving deep into my own think tank, plugging my own podcast. And that's whenever I really started finding personal development. But I hadn't completely separated myself from the whole drinking and from that party aspect of my life yet. It wasn't that exact moment that completely transformed everything. It was more of a iterative growth process. But I was at a party with a couple of my friends that I'd grown up with, and I had happened to go into my buddy's older brother's restroom. And I just wanted to, I needed a second to get away. Because to be completely honest with you, I've never really felt at home whenever I'm in that kind of setting. I feel like I've always used alcohol as a depressant to kind of like bring me on level with the people that I'm with, to be able to connect with people a little bit deeper, quiet the mind that's saying, hey, you're not in the right room kind of thing. So I needed a second to kind of detach myself. And so I go up into my friend's brother's restroom, and sitting as his bathroom book was Think and Grow Rich. And I don't know what it was about the title that drew me in, but I opened the book and I read the first chapter while I was sitting on the toilet in my buddy's
the first
restroom.
chapter is Desire? Or no, I think it was an introduction where it told the story about him with Carnegie. Keep going.
Intro,
I'm sorry to
yes.
interrupt you.
No, it is. You're
Yep.
right. It's an intro into the book, who Napoleon Hill is, how he was connected with Andrew Carnegie, and that sort of thing. It piqued my interest enough, and I did the most unmoral thing you could do in this situation, and I stole the book.
Stole the book.
I took the book and I put it into my backpack, and I knew there was something that drew me to it because I had already researched a little bit of neurolinguistic programming. I had already done a little bit of soul searching and personal development. I knew that this was something that I wanted to explore more, and I knew that I had a feeling, an intuition about that moment where basically my entire body, like I could feel that I needed to do something, to take action, to further myself and get myself out of this place of pain. And so what happened was I took the book eventually. Long story short, I read through the book. I became obsessed with it. And I started, every morning I woke up at 4 a.m. I started listening to podcasts regularly, and I had what I call my monk year. So after the DUI, I basically had like a monk year where for approximately a year, I would wake up religiously. I did not miss one day. I would post on my Snapchat every single day, 4 a.m. I would meditate for an hour to an hour and a half a day. Then I would run 5 miles a day. And this started my mindset. I primed my mindset for the day, spiritually, emotionally, physically, and I basically just started executing like a savage. But I didn't really have a framework or structure to keep me going. And then the last part of my morning routine was to post what I called truth talks on my Snapchat. So I basically would give one truth of life and something like the currencies of life, how your willpower or how your mindset, your knowledge are currencies of life that you can use to leverage in different situations. And so, long story short, I ended up moving out to Tampa to finish out my college career, and I started kind of falling off track again. And then, roundabout way, I started falling back to my old programming, my old habitual processes, and I got to a point where it was very similar. I did not have a car. I was walking 9 miles one way just to get to and from school, 7.5 miles one way just to get to and from work, and I was spending on about $1,500 a month just on Uber. And so I was like, I'm in too much pain. I'm bleeding too much cash. I'm just going to walk. And I was walking home from school one day whenever I'd listened to the first ever episode of the Hyperconscious podcast. And I heard your story, and I resonated so deeply with so many different aspects of your story. And I felt compelled. It was one of those other intuition or inflection points, those intuition moments where you feel your whole body is like, this is the action that you need to take. This is a door that's opening for you right now. And that's what drove me to reach out to you. I was in so much pain that I needed to change. I was at that new standard of rock bottom for myself, and I just needed to reach out. And then since then, the rest is history.
So this is the second episode we have done with a listener / client. Tiffany Wells from Ashes to Passion. She is like me.
Right.
Her story is very similar to my story. She feels very similarly to the way I feel.
Right.
And you guys feel, is that a thing?
Oh,
And
yeah.
That's very,
gotta be a thing.
Right, that's got to be a thing.
Part of how the law of attraction
Right.
actually works.
Right.
Exactly, yeah.
And thank you so much for the love. I wanted to, so inflection points. You
Right.
said inflection points. For the listeners, what is an inflection point? How do you know what it is as you're having it, or is it when you're looking back?
It's
Talk to us.
interesting because I'm actually like working on writing an article that specifically answers that question right now. And so there's that quote by Steve Jobs. You'll probably be able to recite it better than I can, but it's something along the lines of like, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect the dots looking back. So you have to believe in something, your gut, faith, whatever the case may be, that the dots will somehow connect in your future. But my question is, how do you know when those dots are connecting? How do you know when those inflection points, per se, are happening in real time? He's only focused on past or future. He's not focused on the present orientation. So how can I know in real time that an inflection point is happening? And so my hypothesis is, once you go deep enough into the process of spirituality and also into the process of personal development, once you have that clear destination plugged into the GPS, then that will tell you what directions to turn. Each direction that you're turning down your path is what's called an inflection point. So how do you know whenever there is an inflection point? Basically, an inflection point is something that levels you up or forces you into the rooms with the right people that will advance you towards the direction that you're headed. So you have to first, as I said with the GPS thing, you have to have a destination in the GPS before you can even know what an inflection point is. You can take any road to get to a path leading to nowhere.
Exactly.
Right.
Right. And so that's kind of what an inflection point is.
So if you're out there listening right now, one of the main things that I do with my clients is I try to create that GPS, that direction first, because then inflection points can be noticeable, and then you'll know when those courageous moments come up of, I have to reach out on Snapchat, or I have to get in this room with this person, I have to step up and give this speech, I have to have dinner with this mentor. So for you and I, we've worked together a lot on getting more clarity around what I would refer to as the pyramid of the human condition. So the bottom is your core values, and then you have the true north at the top, and then everything in between is your daily actions and your habits. And so the core values we get clear on, but we also got clear on a purpose prayer.
Right.
So we've said on this podcast many times, Kevin, you need two things primarily. You need goals and dreams, for sure, because that will force you to grow and scale your purpose, but you also need them attached to a very deep why, a purpose.
Right.
So I also had you do a purpose prayer that you now have. So my question for you is, for the listeners out there who maybe have dreams without a purpose, what do we say to them? And the alternative, someone who has maybe a very clear purpose, but maybe not dreams to scale it.
Okay, so dreams without a purpose. So a vision without action is merely a dream, right? So that's a quote by Kevin Gates. And so
The rapper?
Yes, the rapper.
Good for you for knowing that.
Yeah. So a vision without action is merely a dream, right? So how can you take action, immediate action towards whatever your dream is, no matter how small the first step is, right? So if you think about, obviously, we've talked a lot about the compound effect. Darren Hardy, shout out to you, and it's getting momentum. How can you start the process of building momentum and priming your subconscious mind towards in the direction that you need to, so that you can identify opportunities that will push you closer to what manifesting that dream into reality, right? So obviously the first step for that is what's the quickest way that you can take a visualization and then bring it into three-dimensional space, into a tangible piece of paper that you can interact with. It's writing it down, right? So that's why they say it's so important for you to write your goals down, write down whatever it is that you want to attract. And so this is kind of the process that I take, and this will also answer both ends, right? So someone that has goals but doesn't have a dream, right? If you have goals and you're just only focused on the micro, but you don't have that long-term vision, you're just taking turns down the path to nowhere. It's the same sort of thing, but you're not going to have any results that are congruent with who you are as a person. Then you feel unfulfilled, and then you end up spiraling downward anyway. So I always say start from the first dimension and work towards the third dimension, right? We live in three different dimensions. So this is basically reverse engineering the PMES scale to be SEMP.
For those of you who have not listened to the episode where I referenced PMES,
Going
let's
deep.
Explain that. Can you explain PMES?
Okay, so
this is the co-founder of the PMES communication system.
So it's very interesting because different people have different lenses for perceiving the world. And so it's classified in these four specific arenas. Your P is physical, M is mental, E is emotional, and S is spiritual. So these are the four layers or lenses or filters that we perceive our life through. And so I think that this is a stronger correlating factor to understanding the internal processes of somebody's mindset, of somebody's emotional set, and understanding what each person's competence, their moral quotient, their emotional intelligence, their IQ, their intellectual quotient, and then also their physical competency. Understanding what their levels in each one of these arenas can give you a peer insight into the way that they normally operate. And then this kind of breaks down the coding of their mindset, right? So you listen to the words and thoughts that they think and speak on a daily basis, and that can then, understanding that blended with the PMES system, can then tell you, okay, well, now I can assume or anticipate that this is how this person is feeling or thinking in this particular arena, and now I can then connect with this person deeper.
Right.
So by speaking to them in a way that will resonate deepest. So
you mentioned the 3 dimensions.
Right.
How does that incorporate into the PMES system?
Right. So now the first dimension would be spiritual. Right? So that's the deepest core of our perception, right? So whenever you ask the question, who am I? And you keep going through that, you say, okay, well, I'm Alex Hinkle, or I'm Kevin Palmieri, or I'm Alan Lazarus, right? But that's just a name, that's just a title, right?
Label, yep.
It's a label. So then you go deeper than that. Well, who's the one that said that, right? And then you go deeper than that. Well, you keep doing this process until you realize that it's a vibrational source of energy within you, a spirit that is conducting your own sense of experience, right?
One of my coaches one time said the silent observer.
Right.
The person who is observing you having the thought. And without going too deep into the S side, but like that is the part of you that never was born, never dies, it's energy.
Yes.
It never created nor destroyed. It's the deepest part of it.
Exactly. 100%. That is the first dimension, right?
Right.
And then the layer on top of that is going to be the E and the M, right? So your emotions, which the activating force of your emotions are going to be your beliefs, right? And then, or your emotions as well, right? And then the mental, that's going to be the second dimension, right? So that's the layer behind your eyes, right? That you are, consciously thinking, your subconscious and your conscious mind, right? And then third dimension is going to be physical. Obviously, everything that we can touch, feel, all our sensory
Just to clarify, because this is so complex for the listeners, your emotions is your subconscious mostly.
Yes.
Your conscious mind, which is your mental. Your
Yes.
strategy, your
Yes.
logic, your rationality. That's
Yes.
prefrontal cortex. Now, what we try to do on this podcast is take things in the subconscious, bring them to the conscious, rewire them so they get downloaded again into the subconscious
Yes.
as an automatic habit.
Exactly.
Yeah, keep going.
So that's basically from first dimension onward, right? Up
Right.
until the third dimension. And so now what are the activating forces in each one of these arenas, and how can I use them so that I can manifest whatever it is that I want, right? So it has to start from your spirituality, right? So from your spirit.
Your imagination.
So imagination is the activating force of the spirit, right? So you have to imagine or picture in your mind or immerse yourself in a visualization of a brighter, greater tomorrow, right? So think a decade into the future or 2 decades into the future and say, what do I want my life to look like, feel like, smell like, taste like? Immerse yourself in that visualization. And once it becomes deeper than your regular daily sense of experience, that's whenever you have the clarity to start executing towards that, right? That's when you define the address that you're plugging into the GPS, right? So then the next step is to go from S to E, bring it from first to second dimension, right?
Yep.
So E is your emotional center. So your beliefs. Do you believe in yourself? Do you have self-belief? Do you have enough confidence that you can actually achieve whatever it is that you're trying to manifest?
Right.
Right? And then once you develop strong enough belief, then you have to bring it to the mental, right? And say, what are my
Strategize,
goals,
my favorite part.
strategies, what is actually the system that I need to create within my mindset, within my heart set, within my spiritual set, within my physicality, within my real life, logistics of my lifestyle, to bring this particular vision into fruition. Then
into results, which is physical.
Results.
That you can then see.
That
now,
is it.
here's the problem, and I say this to the listeners all the time. The tip of the iceberg is
Yes.
the P.
Yes.
That's the physical results that we all see on a
Yes.
daily basis, but we're not looking at the underneath the surface of the E, the M, and the S, or the
Yes.
MES in
Correct.
this case, that's
Yeah.
holding that afloat.
Correct.
Can you clarify that analogy for people in your own unique way? Because the marketing of the world is showing you only the P.
Correct.
It's not showing you the emotional mastery necessary to keep that afloat.
Right.
It's not showing you the mental strategies, logic, and rationality and knowledge
Right.
to keep it afloat. And it's certainly not showing you the visualization that was once only in your mind.
Right. So give me a little bit more, though, on what you want me to clarify.
I guess explain the iceberg
Right.
from your point of view, given the system that we created to understand it.
Okay. So
like fundamentally.
Right. So basically, it goes back to the activating forces, right? So what you have to reflect and project. Take a moment to stop in this moment and think, right? And allow yourself to open up and allow your subconscious mind to flow into whatever it is that it needs to show you, right? And so what happens is whenever you go through a meditative process, whenever you take a second to just focus on your breathing and allow all other distractions to just go to the wayside, you do sensory deprivation. I always put a blindfold on when I meditate. I always put headphones in and listen to binaural beats whenever I do that, just so that I'm fully zoned in and completely shut out of the physical. So that gives me a lot more clarity on my mental state, my emotional state, and my spiritual state, right? So then what happens is...
This is similar to a float tank, by the way.
Correct.
If you've ever heard of float tanks, that's what it's doing. Sensory deprivation. You're in a dark room.
Yes.
You're floating, so there's no touch. You're
Yes.
taking away the 5 senses and
Yes.
only focusing on the 6th sense, which is spirit.
What is a good way for so I'll tell you right now, that is all of that is overwhelming as hell. I
Right.
know it because I've learned it right from both of you. But what is an easy way somebody can start experimenting and exploring with that? So Alan wants you to go super deep. I want
Okay.
you to come back.
Practical.
Yes.
Right.
I see what you're saying. What is a step that I can take in this moment that can allow me to develop a deeper sense of connectivity with myself? Let's take 10 seconds of just complete silence. So now whenever you quiet the mind's chatter, right? And whenever you take a second, the way you breathe is the way you live. So just by taking a second to focus on your breath, to focus on the way that you're breathing, that is what determines the frequency that you are emitting, right? And so just by taking a second to redirect and come back to center, I believe it was Meltzer that ended up saying that, whenever you find your center and you come back to center, then that is a process that in the moment anybody can do. You just take a second to quiet everything down, to turn off and reboot the system, right? And whenever you do that enough times, and I'll give a practical example after this, is that allows you to do what's called a pattern interrupt. So doing pattern interrupts on yourself is one of the greatest ways to override your conscious processes, right? Your programming of your mind, right? So people have a lot of negative habits, right? If you think about it on a daily basis, some people smoke, some people do this or that, drinking, it was a big thing that I ended up getting into. That was a negative habit if you really think about it in that way. But also with our mental, emotional, and spiritual sides as well, these lenses have horrible habits that nobody understands as well.
Right. One example might be I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough.
Limiting
I'm not
beliefs.
good enough. Right.
Yes. 100%.
So you can interrupt that pattern with 10 seconds of silence.
Exactly.
Come back to center and then decide to make a new choice.
So now
thought.
to give the example,
Please.
I struggled with a lot of the limiting beliefs and a lot of anger issues when I was younger, and I kind of just stumbled upon this process for myself. And I remember there was one specific time, I won't get into too many details, but one specific time where I was just infuriated, I was livid. And then I took a second to just come to center and take a breath and go... And I found my mantra was step outside of it. So what I did in that moment was I went into my mind's eye. I closed my eyes and went into my mind's eye and took a 30,000-foot bird's eye view of me standing in that moment where I was at. And I took that removed perspective and said, step outside of my own mindset. And whenever I said step outside of it, step outside of it, whatever that mantra is to you that helps you gain that clarity in that moment is that pattern interrupt that will allow you to come back to center and allow you to reset the vibrational tone of your heart set, your mindset, whatever the case may be.
So I get laughed at for this kind of often, but it's kind of my jam.
Yeah.
I always think of, and I've said this a million times on the podcast, but I always think of like the fact that none of this is even real.
Right.
Like we're on a planet that's spinning around the sun.
Right.
And like, that's my bird's eye. I literally think
Yes.
about that. And then it's like, dude, everything matters still. I understand that. And I don't mean that, nothing matters. But like, a lot of the things that you really, really think are controlling your life, if you take a look from a different perspective, if you
Yes.
take a look from a different appreciation or anything, like it makes a world of difference. So when you said that actually spoke to me because I never realized that's what I was doing.
Right.
I just thought I was nuts.
No.
So on one side of the coin, everything you do, say, think, and feel matters. And on the other side, nothing does. And it's the dance between those two extremes where we live. Now, we have to strategically understand from a practical standpoint, like if I'm losing my temper, I want to say, and I say, detach from this. And I picture the earth without me on it. Okay?
What a great
And
place.
that way I fully...
What a great place it would be.
Interesting.
That, ladies and gentlemen, is a pattern interrupter.
And I forgot my train of thought. No, so in that case, it's de-emotionalized.
Right.
Because emotions, when we care deeply, a lot of times we get in trouble because we care deeply and things aren't going the way we want them to. We get triggered, there's a fight or flight response, and then we are in what I refer to as an unresourceful state.
Right.
When you're in an unresourceful state, you're not able to think consciously.
Right.
Because all of the blood goes to your extremities and out of your prefrontal cortex. So you have a very terrible decision-making paradigm in that moment. Therefore, I say detach from this, picture myself on the earth, or the earth without me on it. Then I'm unemotionalized. Now I can get back to center and then make a good decision. Now, here's the thing. I don't want everyone out there to say, oh, well, nothing matters. No, everything you do, say, think, and feel matters very much, probably more than you realize to those you love and beyond in terms of the ripple effect of positive impact. But when you're in an unresourceful state, going to the spiritual place of none of this matters. My tire getting flat is not that big a deal, is super, super useful.
Yes. And so one thing that I love that you said is you were talking about the two tail ends and we have to be in the middle of that, right? So what I call that is I say that my personality is the perfect blend between the spiritual warrior and the mad scientist.
Yes.
And so what do I mean by that? So at different times, I'm operating 80-20 in different arenas, right? So obviously, like you guys getting after it, you guys are connecting, networking with people, you guys are on the podcast, this kind of thing, right? 80% mad scientist, 20% spiritual warrior, right? You're not as present, you're not as focused on that. You're still here, right? You're still operating, right? But you're... And you're not completely detached, but you're so immersed in every single action, every single tweak, every single word, every single thought is calculated, right? And then in the same way, this is what Gary Vee calls clouds and dirt, right? 80-20, well, what happens is you have level up and level out phases. And so sometimes you need to go 80% spiritual, 20% physical, right? So 80% of the spiritual warrior.
Can you describe each of them? The mad scientist and the spiritual warrior. And just for reference, because the listeners have heard me say this, Tony Robbins says there's two master skills to life. One is the science of achievement, the science. In other words, if you have the right recipe, you can always make the same chocolate cake.
Correct. Yep.
That's the inputs and outputs, Newton's third law, all that.
Yes.
Then there's the art of fulfillment.
Right.
The reason why it's an art is because it's not always the same for every person and every circumstance.
Exactly.
So the spiritual warrior, the mad scientist, go.
That is a great way that Tony Robbins uses to explain it. The way that I like to explain it is, okay, Zen Buddhism classifies the spiritual warrior as the person that dedicates their life to this mission, and that mission is to rid the world of its greatest evil, which is self-ignorance. Despite the quote, ignorance is bliss, I think that that's more of a sarcastic statement because people that are ignorant, they don't know that they don't know what they don't know, and they're completely okay with that. And that's basically what saying ignorance is bliss is. And I think that that's completely wrong.
I think that's the opposite.
I think it's the exact opposite, right? But then the other side, the mad scientist, is being so immersed in reality, what we like to call reality, right? And questioning everything, having an insatiable curiosity, running experiments constantly testing things. And this is with our habits, right? So an example of how I use one or the other is, perfect example. I was driving here to your guys' place, and as I was driving, there is just green, right? Forests of green that you drive through.
Oh, yeah.
And I took a second to just like take it all in, you know, and slow things down a little bit and appreciate, first and foremost, you know, where I was at in that exact moment and saying, this feels so right. You know what I mean? And just taking a second, 1 second is all you need to appreciate the beauty and the scenery of where you're at. Is connecting with and being as present as possible without focusing on the macro, right? But then also, mad scientists, we're in the lab, we're running experiments right now.
Right.
See what I'm saying? So perfect.
I was driving down here like Mad Max in traffic, and there was I didn't reflect at all. I was just hammering it down here in the rain because I was like, yeah, we got a podcast. So, okay. Alan and I could very easily, before this episode, we'll just do behind the scenes. We were messing with a mixer, we were messing with the levels. Like, one of the microphones doesn't have the thing on it we want. This is a whole new setup with 3 people, blah, 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 blah. What is the difference between saying, like, going to a spiritual place, so to say, and say, like, you know what? This is all fine.
Right.
No, it's fine. Like, we're just going to record. It's fine. Whatever happens, happens.
Right.
And then being obsessed, like we are, right, to the point where it's like, okay, let's just look for it. Oh, let's do this. Let's do this. Let's do this. How do you know when you're too much, too heavy on one end versus too heavy on the other?
You can feel it. So you have to keep a pulse, right? So you're constantly keeping a pulse on both tail ends of the experience. It's the same way that Alan said you're somewhere in the center. Well, that
The
center
drive to 5, you
exactly.
might say.
It is
yes.
great analogy, but you're not always going to be at that perfect medium. You're going to be more likely on one end of the scale or the other. And so you can sense 80-20, right? Which one am I? What's the percentage at in each arena right now? So an example is whenever you were messing with the mixer, whenever we were messing with the mics, if you take a second to just say,
Don't let that bother you. We're
if
fine.
you take a second to just say, let's roll with the punches, don't let that bother you, it'll be fine, right? Boom, exactly.
Perfect timing.
Perfect
The
timing.
universe provides.
Exactly. So that's a perfect example of like, okay, well, it's going to work. We're going to make it work. And one thing that I was saying to Alan in the gym yesterday is the timing of our lives is perfect. Don't question it. Ride the wave. And so you obviously, we had a little debate on that.
Yeah.
I was gonna say.
Even right now, my smile is, I don't want to say I disagree, but I do, I think we need more clarity. What do you mean by that?
Well, okay, so that's a question of like divine timing and whether you believe in that or not, right? So do you believe that the process of evolution in your life, tapping into the compound effect, is accelerating at the rate that it's meant to for yourself, right? And
No.
okay,
I don't believe that.
because you have a higher level of you have a higher set of goals. You have a higher standard that you're trying. So what you're trying to do is accelerate that process quickly. So then the question becomes not necessarily how do I speed up this process, but how do I identify the catalyst, i.e. the leverage points
Right.
that will allow me to level up at a grander scale.
Right.
So, because what happens is whenever you feel that dissatisfaction with the divine timing per se, it's because you're not leveling up or expanding whenever you're contracting when you should be expanding, right? So you're going too hard in the spiritual warrior per se, or you're going too far on the not
What's the
executing
barometer?
side.
Being in inner peace? Is inner peace the barometer?
Exactly,
So if
right.
you don't have inner peace, then there's something you need to shift in your perception or your behavior.
Correct.
If you do have inner peace, you're in the right timing.
Right, and then the question becomes, do I feel as if I'm in the right place at this moment right now?
I do.
Right.
Right now, yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
And then that tells you that you are perfectly center.
Okay.
Right? So then if you find your center, if you're constantly finding your center, it's a skill, right? In the same way that you put in bicep reps.
Oh, yeah.
You put in
Kevin's
reps
slacking.
mentally, emotionally, spiritually.
I don't even have to respond. Like, I just know it's not true.
If you guys look at the animation
Guys,
on
the
YouTube,
animation it's not true.
No, it's true.
I can squat more with one leg than you can with two.
Is that true?
Probably.
I don't think that.
You shouldn't even have to question that. That's the problem.
Yeah, interesting.
So another thing. Okay, so we're
I gotta
talking.
go to the bathroom.
Oh, for
No,
Christ's
you guys
sake.
go right ahead. You
For-
can do your thing.
Another thing is like, well, make sure you disconnect your headphones. This will be a whole thing. Going back to center.
Right.
For me, when I hear that, I realize that what people think, what people do, what people feel, how they react, their experiences on the daily basis becomes normal. Now, for somebody who has depression or anxiety or some sort of mental illness they feel,
Yes.
how do they go back to center? Because aren't they going to be replaying their identity in their head this whole time? Ladies and gentlemen, we hope you were enjoying this episode where Alan and I were lucky enough to sit down with Mr. Alex Hinkle.
Oh,
We're
yeah.
getting ready to sit down and record another course for the hyperconsciouspodcast.com. We're going to do a course on limiting beliefs. So picture this. There are 3 columns. In the first one is a limiting belief that you think. The second one is an excuse that you might make up for that limiting belief. And then the third column is the result. So as an example, I would use my fear of flying. For a long time, I had the limiting belief that I couldn't fly. My excuse was, well, I don't really like to travel anyway. I don't really care if I see any nice things. Massachusetts is pretty nice. And the result, if I didn't change that limiting belief, I would have regretted that. I would have realized that that is just a mask for my fear. And in 10, 15, 20 years, that would have been something that I really regretted.
Folks, I remember when I was really young, I was told I had a limiting belief that I was bad at reading and writing, and I was really great at math. So naturally, I was drawn to what I was told I was great at, what I was praised for, which was math. Therefore, I got better at math. Therefore, that leaked back into my identity. So beliefs are very powerful. Do not miss this course. It will, without a question, uncover some limiting beliefs that might be holding you back.
Head on over to the hyperconsciouspodcast.com/free to find it. And do you think we should get back into the episode?
Yeah, let's go talk to Alex.
Okay, talk to you soon. And this is a deep-ass question.
No. I see what you're saying. And trust me, like, I've studied neurolinguistic programming for about between 5 and 7 years, psychotherapy, all that kind of stuff. So I totally am vibing with you. The biggest thing for somebody with some type of mental illness is to understand that, maybe you're not seeing things through the correct lens. Right? So then this goes back to, let's go back to the fundamentals. Let's go back to the basics. What are the words and thoughts that you're thinking and speaking on a regular day? Right, on a regular basis. So now to kind of give, I know I'm talking about neurolinguistic programming, this big term, to kind of dive deep into that and explain what it means. Neuro is your brain, linguistics is language, and programming is the operating system that your brain runs on a daily basis. So you program your mind through your language. So people that have these kind of mental illnesses or some type of serious depression, serious anxiety, one thing I said to one of the clients that I'm working with right now is he was about to go into a $10 million deal with a potential investor. And he was saying, I'm so anxious for this meeting. I don't know what's going to happen. Very frantic a little bit, right? And so now I tried to balance him out on the opposite end of the scale. So I pulled it back and I said, well, Jim, do you realize that, he was very E, right? So then I had to balance it out with the M, right? So I said, do you realize that the neuroscience of your brain, the chemical of feeling anxious, the chemical that's in your body that is being transferred, that you feel right now is the same exact chemical that is classified as excitement. But your mind is framing it in the idea of anxiety because of your particular decision of perspective in this particular arena or in this particular what's the word?
Circumstance,
exactly, right. So that's the biggest thing is how can you reframe your mindset to be as constructive in this moment to facilitate the greatest possible feeling of connectedness to yourself, right? And so that's I know that's very deep, that's very transcendental, that's very hippy dippy woohoo, but no, to bring it back to reality, it's like this is your mental health, right? This is your emotional intelligence. That's where it goes back to what is your level of competency in the physical arena, your IQ, your EQ, and your MQ. Right? MQ, moral quotient, EQ, emotional intelligence, that kind of thing, right? So how can you do different exercises to strengthen your MQ, to strengthen your EQ, to strengthen your IQ? So whenever you are faced with something like depression, what is it that you're depressed about, and how can you take action in this moment right now to diminish that feeling of depression, to diminish that feeling of anxiety? So an example, to go back to that with the client that I was working with, I basically said to him, I was like, so now what you're going to do is you're going to take a pen and paper and you are going to write down every aspect of this particular interaction that you're going to have. What is it that this person would look for from the relationship that you're trying to build with them, right? And what's your agenda, right? What are you going to get out of this relationship as well? Write those things down and have a plan of action going into it. Immediately defeated the anxiety. And I talked to him Tuesday through Thursday. So Tuesday came back around. This was Tuesday through Friday, excuse me. And so it was a Friday that he had the meeting. I didn't see him Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Tuesday, we get back on the phone. I crushed the $10 million deal. I didn't close him yet, but there were 2 other people, and I ended up completely outweighing him. I appealed to his charity. That was something that I wanted to connect with him on, and I wanted to help him. So I know for a fact that I appealed to his contribution in a great way, and I think that will lead to me ending up having greater rapport and getting the deal in the long run, and now it's just chipping away at continuing that process.
Well, uncertainty is the thing, really. Like, when I'm anxious, it's because I'm uncertain. I don't know what to expect. When I know it's like, there are things that I used to get anxious about, now that I get excited about. Why?
Exactly.
Because now I have the confidence, because I have the evidence,
right,
and I know what to expect. I know what the experience is.
Right.
So I can base my information off of actual
data.
Yes. Yeah, and not like expectations.
Right.
Expectations. I was actually going to say that would be a good small talk word. Expectations. When
Yeah,
you
it
have
would.
expectations of something, even if your expectations are wrong, which they are 99% of the
Yes.
time,
Oh yeah.
even if they were correct, you probably still would have anxiety because you don't have your expectations aren't guaranteed to be right.
So that's an example of mad scientist versus spiritual warrior. You're too heavy in the mad scientist whenever you have expectations, right? You're expecting a specific outcome, right? If okay, so what is the process of science? The scientific method, right? You develop a hypothesis, but that hypothesis might not always be right. That's why you have to run the experiment, right? So you go into it, right, having this expectation per se, right? But if you have an expectation, realize that, maybe I should be a little bit more spiritual warrior here and allow things to flow. Maybe just ride the wave a little bit. Maybe this is where a moment where I need to ride the wave, trust in myself, right? That's what I mean by don't question it, just ride the wave. Don't question your own abilities to expand, to grow, to succeed. Have that unwavering, undying belief that you can accomplish and you can create whatever it is that you want. Because if you think about it in this way, right, we are all the creators of every experience we've ever had based on every decision that we made. So one thing that I've been doing with my clients as well is I ask them this question, and I say, if you could define the process of living, and it'd be a universal thing in 3 words, what would those 3 words be, right? And so, do you guys want to take a crack at it? I don't know if I did this with you.
You did already.
Okay, so you
Yeah.
already know what's coming.
I don't even thinking, doing, changing.
Okay, that's great. So my 3 would be game of decisions,
Oh, interesting. Yours are better than mine.
right?
You
And
have the
one
cheat
of them
codes.
is of. One of them is of. You know what I mean?
Right.
But also, now think about it. What's that acronym spell?
GAC.
Game of decisions?
Oh, decision.
G-O-D.
Yeah.
G-O-D. Gag.
For some reason, I thought there was an A and C in there. Fried.
Right? But now, so you see how, and it was just a coincidence, right? So,
God.
exactly, right?
Right.
Thank you for. But
Well,
anyway,
One of us can spell.
Gag.
I came in second place in my 4th grade spelling bee. I just want people to know
I just
that.
want everyone to
top.
know that.
I lost on there. It was Their. I thought it was There. I've never spelt it, mixed it up since.
well, there
Painful
you go,
lesson.
right?
Painful lesson.
Hey, you got to break to build sometimes, right?
Always.
Pull it back to getting on focus, Mr. Logistics guy.
Yes.
But so anyway, that also it wasn't a coincidence that happened to be my 3. Was like, we are the creators of our own experience based on every decision that we have. And so your thoughts are a decision, the words that you speak are a decision. If I choose to the high five, right? I chose to put my hand up and say, let's have a high five because I fucking, daps on that, right? Excuse the language. But yeah.
Pardon
so,
the French.
Right? So every single action, every single word, every single thought that you have is a decision that you can change at any moment, right? And that's why the whole purpose prayer, that's why the whole I am affirmations are so very important, because whenever you say I am, you are deciding in that moment to reprogram your mind, rewire who you are, and you are forever changed at that moment, right? So the first line of my purpose prayer, I am on this earth to cause a ripple effect that positively affects the human race. I could literally recite the whole thing right now. And it's a series of I am affirmations that define what my unique purpose is on this earth, right? And the first one is to cause a ripple effect that positively affects the human race, right? So now I've set my standards so high that from every action that I take, every decision that I make, every thought, every word has to be calculated in a way that it's aligned with my purpose of causing a ripple effect that will positively affect the human race. So now, if I'm in a situation where do I decide to hold the door open? Here's a perfect example. I have an accountability group every Tuesday night, which actually 8 o'clock I'm going to be missing. But anyway, shout out to you guys, Elijah, Cal, all you guys. But anyway, so basically, what one of my goals for that week was a random act of kindness. And I was walking out of a breakfast cafe, and this old man was just laying on the ground. He was just laying on the ground. I was like, at first I was kind of like taken back. He looked fine, right? His face was very calm. I was like, is he okay? Like, what's he doing? Like, should I take action? Instantly, I jumped to it because I remembered, go back to center. This is my course of action, right? So another example, and Kevin or Alan, you were there for me whenever one of my clients, he had gone through a very, very traumatizing experience.
Oh yeah.
You know what I'm talking about
Yeah,
specifically.
for sure.
And one of my clients, I won't name any names just for privacy reasons, but he ended up, unfortunately, he's calling me at 4 a.m. He knows morning routines like are very, very ritualized for me. Like people can't get a hold of me. I know Alan, you guys are very similar in that way. 4 a.m. He's calling me 3 times missed call. I'm like, dude, what's going on? Like, this is out of the ordinary. I answer the 3rd time he calls. He's hysterically crying on the phone, and I'm like, whoa. Take a deep breath, like slow it down, come back to center. Like, what's going on? And he's like, dude, I am watching my house burn down right in front of me. How do you console someone in a moment like that? And at that moment, I was kind of shocked, and I had to take a second for myself to absorb some of that, right? And then how can I transfer this fire into fuel to help him grow, right? So back to the whole bow and arrow quote, right? That's the moment where you're pulled back, and part of the reason as to why that quote is structured in the way that it is because you have the most what's called potential energy when the bow is stretched to its greatest lengths.
The bow being stretched, is that emotional pain?
That is, yes. So that would be the obstacles that your life puts in front of you. The bow is, your life is the bow.
The tension
right?
that
Exactly.
those create within yourself is potential energy that
Potential
then needs to
energy.
be directed in a way to your true north.
Needs
so this
to be
is
transferred from potential to
right.
kinetic. Right?
Action.
Taking action.
Right.
Yes. So that's another, to pull it back to the whole thing where you were asking about the mental illnesses and stuff too. How can I defeat something with that mental illness? Instantly taking action towards diminishing that, right? If you take action, then you diminish all of that anxiety, you diminish all of that fear, you diminish any fear states that you could possibly have. Right? So then what I did was, honestly, I was like, this is a little bit much. Let me get on a mastermind call with Alan as well to help me with this. And then basically we ended up coming together and reframed his mindset in a way that allowed him to realize that, this was actually relinquishing his family of something that was trapping them. And now they have more of a nomadic, lucid lifestyle that allows them to feel more free, that allows them to grow in an environment that is more facilitating, it's had more nutrient rich for the seeds to blossom.
Right.
See what
Sort
I'm
of like
saying?
the phoenix rising from the ashes. But also the first thing we did is be thankful that no one was hurt.
Exactly.
That, like, what can we be grateful for first?
Yes.
Starting with gratitude will empower you every single time. And I'm not as good at it as I would like to be. But that's one thing we did immediately is first, like, what's good about this?
Right.
That's the first question you should always ask
Yeah.
yourself. And I know at first it's like, nothing's good about this.
Right.
This is horrible. No, there's something.
I remember
if
he
you
told
search.
me that. Yeah, I remember he said that. He's like, yeah, Alex called me at 4 a.m. and his client's going through this, and it was like, wow, like
Right.
it's very. If you think of it, it's like, my goodness, I can't imagine what that's like, right? I can't imagine what that's like. I
Right.
can't even fathom what that
Right.
feels like.
Right.
But then imagine not being able to fathom that, and then the same thing happening but worse.
Right.
Right.
It's like, but again, it's very hard to put yourself there.
Exactly.
It almost something has to happen somewhere else for you to get the perspective.
And then being the one person that person turns to
Yeah.
in that moment, that kind of responsibility, that could make or break someone.
Being a coach, Alan and I always say this, and I guarantee you're going to agree.
Yeah.
You learn more about just as much, if not more, about yourself as you do about other people and people in general.
I think it's the most humbling profession that you could possibly have, because what you're doing as a coach, right, is you are this. Shout out to Alex Glenn for giving me this analogy, doing what's called churning the soil. Right, so you're consistently, or as Alan refers to as shaking the snow globe, right? You are consistently relinquishing toxic energy and building structures within that person's life that allows them to grow at their greatest potential, right?
Based on what they want.
Exactly, that's
More
custom
of, which
tailored.
isn't necessarily what they say they want.
Right.
It's what you know they want
What you know is best for them
based
to-
on what they've right.
Exactly,
Yeah.
but the only way that you could be able to tell is if you're further along the process than they are.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
So
Interesting.
I kind of want to go back to the gratitude thing, though.
Okay.
And kind of one thing that people don't necessarily understand, people hear like, oh, you should be grateful, have gratitude, whatever the case may be, blah, 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 right? And I know that you talk about the whole happiness thing, too, is like happiness, joy, fulfillment. And so I'm going to kind of connect those and then explain a reason as to why gratitude is so important, right?
I like it.
In the form of law of attraction.
Okay.
So happiness, what is your definition of happiness? and I already know the answer, but go for it.
Okay, so I believe that happiness is actually defined by 3 primary frameworks. I think joy, happiness, and fulfillment. Joy is when you're in the process of doing something that you enjoy. Happiness is if-then. In other words, you go for a goal, a certain result that you may or may not get,
Correct.
and that's a dopamine hit of yes or no. And then that's result reliant, so you can't rely on that necessarily. And then fulfillment, I think, only comes when you are in the pursuit of something that you believe in that is bigger than yourself,
Right.
that forces you to grow and contribute. Something you can be proud of.
I love it. So to kind of label that in a very condensed way, right? Fulfillment is macro, right? Am I
Right.
fulfilled with the process of my lifestyle, right? And then joy is micro, right?
The moment.
Is in the moment, am I enjoying the process?
Right.
And then happiness is what are the results, right? And then, so now think about it this way, right? For me, every single second or every single morning when I wake up, the first thing that I say whenever my feet touch the ground is, thank you, I'm happy. So I say, if then, right? You say the whole if then, cause and effect reliant, quid pro quo.
Right.
If then, if I am alive and breathing, if I wake up today and my feet touch the ground, then I am happy. That is the only way I play this game, because that fuels your gratitude. So now, one of my biggest questions, mad scientist, biggest curiosities of life and law of attraction and all of these metaphysics and all this is those catalysts, right? What is the activating force that causes manifestation? And I personally believe that one aspect of that is gratitude. I think that the way that you are grateful can greatly increase and magnify the process. It can act as a catalyst towards how quickly you bring things from imagination, spirit, into the physical manifestation of it. How grateful for your current circumstance are you right now, and what you focus on expands, right? So if you focus on negativity, that expands, right? If you focus on gratitude, what am I grateful for today? I'm grateful that I'm alive and breathing. You guys know, first thing I say when I see anybody.
Every time I say, Alex, what's good? We get on the call, and then you say
"How you living?" I say, "It's another day alive and breathing. Everything else is a cherry on top."
Every single time.
Every single time without fail. And I'll give you a story too. I was at the gym. I walk into the gym. Girl that works at the front desk. She's scanning me in. Whatever. She's like, "Hey, how are you?" You know, I didn't think anything of it. Basic programming, right? It's an automatic response. Another day alive and breathing. Everything else is cherry on top. She looks at me and she's stunned, absolutely stunned. In that moment, when I looked at her in the eyes, I realized she had a scar right across her forehead. And she had brain surgery when she was a baby. And she realized in that moment that, like, wow, let me take a second to be grateful for the fact that I'm living. Like, I made it through this.
Right.
And so she brought that to my awareness, and I was, like, so humbled by that.
That's beautiful.
Right? And so that is just one practice that I did to brighten somebody else's day, to show gratitude just for the fact that I'm living, just for the fact that I'm breathing. The way you breathe is the way that you live, right? Connect with that, and that is what helps you heighten your spirituality, what heightens your spiritual warrior, what helps you connect deeper to your mission, to your purpose. And what happens is whenever you get deeper connected to that, signs just come into your sense of awareness, right?
Folks, I just want to say, not to interrupt you, Alex, because this is absolute fire. I just want to say the PMES system, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, Kevin is what I would argue we all have strengths and weaknesses.
Right.
We all are wired a certain way.
Right.
I would argue that my P and M are very high. Kevin has a very high E and P.
Yes.
I just want the listeners to know, to frame everything you're learning from Alex, this is the S. A lot of this is S, and that's what I would consider his strongest point. So, like, if this podcast for you is something that resonates strongly, you're most likely developing your S and you enjoy S. If it's something that doesn't resonate, don't shut off to it. Because take it from me, someone who's very high on the P and M, reality, get after it, compound effect, inputs and outputs, science.
Yep.
Like this is the side that we all need to develop in terms of gratitude, in terms of imagination, in terms of understanding that there's more than meets the eye.
Right. And so what you specifically touched on is balance, right? And I think the process of becoming hyper-conscious is becoming balanced in all of these arenas. Right? So elevating your quotient in each one of these arenas to be above a certain level of perceptiveness. Right? So that you have a more holistic perception of reality, right? So how can one of my questions is, how can I feel the deepest sense of experience, right? The most balanced sense of experience, the most connected sense of experience to everything that I could possibly perceive. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's limited to your sensory inputs, right? So now think about it this way. Animals like snakes or dolphins or bats have heightened senses that we don't have any idea or ability to be able to perceive, right? Like rattlesnakes have the what is it? The heat, thermal vision, and then bats and dolphins have echolocation, like the sonar waves.
Right. All we can do is imagine what that's like.
Exactly, we can imagine it, but that also gives validity to the fact that our senses constrict our perception of reality.
For sure. If you've ever done mushrooms, you know that's true.
Yes.
Just saying.
Exactly.
So I've read.
Right.
Yeah.
Too late now.
Right. Acid too, but so I've read. Right.
Yeah.
But so that's if you realize that you're not only limited to your sensory information, your inputs and outputs, right? Then you expand what you can potentially perceive, right? Just heightening your own sense of awareness, right? So that is the process of opening your intuition, right? So ask the question, what are the things that I'm not conscious of right now, right? The temperature in the room, right? The oxygen that's brushing against your guys' the hairs on your arms. Right? Those little things that you don't necessarily understand. You can't see the oxygen bouncing off between us, but we're not sitting in a vacuum. It's not empty space, right? And so if you take it to that micro of a level, then you can start seeing, okay, this is what constructs the confines of our reality.
I said that the other night when me and Matt were out. We had a fire, and it was windy.
Right.
And again, man, I'm always thinking.
Right.
And I was like, dude, imagine like the first people who felt wind.
Right.
Like they must have been freaking out.
Yeah.
They probably had no idea what was going on. But to us, it's just...
It's natural.
It's natural.
Right.
It's natural to us.
Well, now think about it this way.
Kevin, you're my favorite,
Thank
man.
you. Thank you.
I literally love it, man.
So now think about it this way, though. So when it comes to energies, right? If you break it down to that minimalist of a structure, all that senses are is waves. Everything that you perceive is waves, right? So the lights here are just waves that are bouncing off the rods and cones in our eyes and telling us what particular frequency that vibration is, tells us what color that is, right? And that's the only way that we see things. The way that we hear is vibrations that are coming off of my vocal cords, then vibrate your eardrum, and then that eardrum converts that particular frequency into our memories, then tell us, okay, this is what this particular sound is a frequency, this frequency means, right? And then that's what all of our sensory information is. If you realize that everything that constructs our external reality is waves, then that means that we can change the frequency of those waves just by changing the way that we direct the flow of our own energy.
Right.
Right?
I'm going deep here.
Right?
Yeah.
And so now to pull it back to reality, because we're going too deep.
No, never too deep.
Well, no.
My brain just
We're
hurts.
diving deep into the think tank with Alex Think on the Hyperconscious podcast.
You get the plug at the end. Okay.
Right.
That's 2 plugs.
I know.
Yeah, that's
I know.
2 plugs so far.
You only
Maybe
plugged us
plug.
once.
Yeah.
Plugged yourself twice. You only plugged us once.
Hey, shout out to Alan and Kevin, because I would not be sitting in this chair right now, and I would not be as evolved as a human being without either one of these gentlemen in my life.
Fist bump.
Shout out to the Hyperconscious podcast for making waves and causing a ripple effect that positively will advance the human race.
We appreciate you.
I appreciate you guys
that.
so deeply, and your connection to your mission, and also your balance as a partnership is so admirable. Like, seriously.
I wanted to say to you too before you go off, because there is no place I can just put this.
Go for it.
It won't flow. I learned something about you. So you were in the locker room when Alex and I were sparring, but one thing I like to do with people that I haven't got to see in a while, everybody likes to spar. Everybody likes to throw punches. I feel like that's a thing. Right? Amy did it. Amy was punching me.
Yeah.
Alex and I were doing it. And seeing you in the gym, sparring with you,
Quit punching my clients, dog.
I know, right? I learn about people when I spar with them. I learn about people when they get tired, and I'm not tired. I do this a lot.
Yeah.
And I realized...
Very impressive, by the way.
I appreciate that.
Very,
I
very
realized you're a savage. You are like a next level savage, because you would get tired and walk away and put your hands down, and I'd say, yo, let's go, hands up. Like, this is where you make or break.
Right.
And you kept going. So I want to commend you, because being
you.
in the gym with somebody, we've always said that.
Right.
The second you come into... And
The
I don't mean
arena.
this in a cocky...
The arena of the battlefield.
I don't mean this in a cocky way, but this is my place. When I
Yes.
go to the gym, this is where I'm the most competent.
Yes.
And when we put on those boxing gloves, like you remember Julian, when he put on his boxing gloves, he put on his gear.
wow.
He's a
Yeah.
professional Muay Thai
And I know
fighter.
exactly what you're saying, too, yeah.
Right. And so I am by no means a professional.
No.
Julian would do whatever he wanted to me.
Right.
But being with somebody who is maybe a little less developed in that,
Right.
and you still saying like, all right, come on, let's go. I got another 10 seconds. I got another
Yeah.
15 seconds.
Right.
That was very admirable, and I really learned a lot from you.
Lifting with you was the same exact thing, because that's the arena that I always say this: if you don't know the level the other person's at, most likely they're above your level.
Yes, and that's what I was referencing earlier too. But
Right.
keep going.
Because like if you're farther along in a journey, you can tell where the other person is in a
Exactly.
given arena. Like
Yes.
if you play basketball with Michael Jordan, he's going to know that you're below he's going to know the level you're at because he's
Right.
been at that level before.
Exactly.
Whereas Michael Jordan, if he was playing with someone who was better than him, which there isn't anybody.
Right. No.
No.
Right.
Not yet.
And he,
Nope.
and he didn't know the level they were at, that means they might be ahead.
Right.
Now, so one of the things that I wanted to say, which is to piggyback on what Kevin just said, your ability to be uncomfortable is really, really high. And you came into the gym with me and just kind of followed my lead and
Right.
just did it. Like
Right.
we were doing 3 plates on deadlifts, and I was
Yeah.
like, yo, you should really alternate grips. And you just didn't care, even though it was 3 plates.
Right.
You, for the very first time, you changed your grip
Yes.
and you did 3 plates.
Yeah.
Which you almost like fell over.
A
But
little
I was
bit,
just
right.
like, wow, he is a savage.
Yeah.
The dude just takes action.
There's something about being in a physical
Right.
space with somebody where nothing else matter.
Their
What you
will is
look like
tested,
doesn't
right.
matter. I
Right.
don't care how smart you are when we're lifting weights.
Right.
It doesn't help you get the weight up anymore.
Right. Gravity. You
It's
can't
just-
fucking force it unless you grow.
Yeah, it's just a physical. There's something about a physical altercation with something that does not care whether you move it or not.
Right.
And it's just a humbling experience. And seeing somebody push through that while being humble, while being humbled, it's awesome. It's awesome.
And
also, we're coming up against the clock. I just want to.
How much more time?
You can see it better than I can. Jeff,
Jeff.
what's the number say?
57.
57.
3
Okay.
minutes.
All right, so let's do this. Both of us will ask our questions.
Yep.
Then you can plug, obviously, the think tank, and then where
Got it.
people can hire you to do coaching and stuff. You want to ask yours first?
I can do that.
Yeah, ask
Normally
yours-
you go first.
I know, but let's switch it up.
Let's switch it up.
Yeah.
One thing I do want to say really quickly, just because this episode got very, very deep, and I appreciate you bringing, that's the exact intention that I set. If any of this was overwhelming to any of you, the PMES system, as the co-founder of that sort of system, it's personal power. If you
Right.
take physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, let's call them from 0 to 10.
Right.
I call it drive to 40. We
Right.
call it drive to 40.
Right.
If you're a 40, that is your ability to be the most powerful version of yourself.
Example.
Yeah, give an example.
Tony Robbins.
Right.
Is
Exactly.
a perfect example of somebody that is very competent
In all of those
in
arenas.
all of those arenas.
Right.
I'd say that he's might be a 38, 39,
Right.
right?
Exactly. So the goal is to figure out your own strengths and weaknesses, understand where to use each tool in your tool belt. There's 4 tools:
Right.
physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. Like we just said, the physical.
Right.
Like Kevin is very developed in the physical. His ability to take action is really, really high. If you're out there and you have strong imagination, but you don't ever take action, you're not going to be able to manifest the dreams you want.
Right.
Right? And so figure out what you're strong in. And here's the biggest hack I've ever found. Get around people who are competent in your incompetencies.
Yes.
Kevin is E first. I am not. And it helps me. It's helped me grow tremendously. I'm M first. And that's helped Kevin grow tremendously. And that's what Alex referenced earlier with our teamwork here.
Right.
So if you're out there right now, PMES, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, figure out where you lack and where you're strong, and make sure, remember, birds of a feather flock together, but that's not necessarily the way it should be. Find people that are strong that make you uncomfortable.
Right.
If I'm high M and you're not, I'm going to make you uncomfortable.
Right.
But that's exactly what you need.
Exactly.
I won't lie. There was times during this where I was a
Right.
little bit uncomfortable, just because it's like, and I think I'm getting better at the fact that it's just like, let me just take a step back and let me let this happen.
Right.
Let me just let this happen. This
Right.
is valuable information. Just because I'm not leading the dance, so to say, it doesn't mean it's. But that's something that I've had to work on.
Right.
That and everything is like the E I've had to work on. The
Right.
M I'm always working on. I'm
Right.
always working on that. I'm always trying to work on what's weak, and like being in the room with 2 people who are very M.
Right.
That helps me. So if you're uncomfortable, there are ask yourself why you're uncomfortable. Am I uncomfortable because these 2 guys are assholes? No. I was uncomfortable because I think they're smarter than I am. And that's all. And that's okay. That's okay because that will make me smarter.
Well, now let me preface this
And
with
I have
something as well.
this bicep.
True, very true. Let me preface this though as well. You are a savage at taking action, right? Both of you. all of us, I would say, right?
Yes.
Appreciate that.
But let's look at it from this perspective as well. So the tail ends of our experience, the first and third dimension, right? First dimension, spiritual. The third dimension is physical, right? So if you focus on the tail ends of experience, you're normally going to lead with either M or E. You're normally going to be predominantly E or predominantly M first, right? So that would mean you're EP. That would mean that you're MP.
Yep.
That would mean that, well, I would be what? MS, right?
Yep.
So now think about it this way. If whatever you lead with, you have a higher perceptiveness to be able to develop that other one. So example, you have a higher perceptiveness of developing spirituality and your connectiveness to spirituality because your first one is E.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Right.
Whereas if you're higher in M,
You're more likely.
you're more perceptiveness
to P.
mind-muscle
100%.
connection.
Right.
But then there's also a belief, like an identity belief, spirituality connection.
Imagination,
See what I'm saying?
Yep.
So you can increase your competency in that tail end of experience. You have a higher chance of being able to increase that quicker than somebody like Alan because he's MP, right? Because of your perceptiveness of E. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Right. And
Well,
that's why Kevin's always saying I can feel the energy
Right,
in the room.
right.
I
And
feel.
energy is S and E merging.
Yes,
That's like
exactly.
what that whole thing is.
It's your intuition. It's absorbing that energy and then being able to say, how can I direct the flow that's coming across between us?
Right.
All right, let's hammer these questions.
Let's do that. Okay.
Because
so
you got somewhere to be in 14 minutes. I
14
think.
minutes.
I think. I
David
can't see the
Meltzer's
clock.
calling me.
I can't see the clock, so I'm
When
just
David
going by my
Meltzer's
watch.
calling you. You
I
show
can't
up
even read this
on
thing.
time, man.
Yeah, you better.
Okay. 14 minutes. No, I'm kidding. All right. So my question for you already know it's coming.
Yeah.
I wear this North Star around my neck. Mind, body, heart, and soul. MPES. It represents something unwavering, something that's never changed. You've obviously grown and evolved tremendously, especially in the last 8 months. It's been a true honor to see how much you have changed and grown. It's really mind-blowing, to be completely honest. And, if I have to take a sliver of credit for that, I'll do it.
Hats off to you.
No, I'm
Seriously.
kidding. But what about Alex Hinkle, after all this growth, never changed?
It's interesting because I was listening to the rep with Meltzer. And
His name is Dave.
Dave. I was listening to Dave. Yes.
I'm just
Yeah, I got you. And you had asked the question, and I started thinking about it. And he said the truth, which I thought was really, really interesting. But what is something that is never wavering? Let me think about that for a second. I would say the one thing that's never changed is my desire to connect deeper with my own experience. Whether that means with other people or with a process of learning or growing or whatever the case may be, how can I max out in all arenas of life, right? How can I have as much depth of experience as possible? And I've always been begging that question. That's been the number one question of my entire life. I would say I've always been someone that pushes the bounds of my own sense of experience, trying to continually expand that.
That was fire.
Yeah.
That's the one thing that has never changed.
Married to growth.
As T.S. Eliot would say, only those willing to go too far
We'll never go far enough.
will ever know how far one can go.
Something like that. Okay. I want to switch it up. Usually I would say, what do you want to accomplish before you die? But you already said your purpose prayer, and I feel like that kind of aligns it, right?
Right.
I want to know specifically,
Right.
what do you see? So I had a moment where you were talking, and again, I always try to do this from the listener's perspective. What is the listener thinking? What are they able to absorb from this? Are they resonating with this? What questions would they ask? Right. So for you, hearing you talk, you blow me away. I always say you're one of the most intelligent people I've ever met. I mean that wholeheartedly.
Thank you.
And if you're listening to this and you feel the same and you're like, wow, a lot of that was over my head. Me too, number one. But you're a human.
Right.
I just made that teaser clip for Evan Carmichael. He's a human being. I'm just a human being. I'm just another person. You're just another person.
Correct.
With different experiences, different lessons, different purpose, all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
What specifically do you want your life to look like in 20 years?
So I think there's two ways that I could answer this question. One would be externally and one would be internally, right? So I think internally, not necessarily anything changed, but just more growth internally, right? So a deeper sense of purpose, a deeper sense of execution and confidence, and in all arenas, right?
Alignment.
Connection, alignment, self-actualization, right? So developing and deepening internally my own connection with my experience.
More
right?
of what is.
More expanded exponentially till the end of time,
Forever, right.
Right? But then externally, this is where possibly some of the what's the word I'm looking for? The
Money.
well, yeah.
You doing
so-
charades here?
No, I can't think of the right word. There's a word that some of the possibly selfish goals or something like that
Okay.
would obviously, like, we all want
Material.
materialistic. That's what the word I was looking for. So materialistically, I think obviously people want, house in the Hamptons kind of deal, something like that. The jets, that kind of thing. Like, one of my goals is long term.
Jets, plural. A fleet of jets.
Exactly, right?
Right.
Well, one of my long-term goals is to be a billionaire. Now, it's not necessarily for the vanity, right? It's for the level of impact that I need to have to be for the universe to compensate me in that scale,
Right.
in that magnitude. How can I make such a grand splash in the pool to have that big of a ripple effect, right? And so, what does that look like? What does that feel like? What does that feel like to me? I think it's different for everybody, right? And so I think that what does my life look like in 20 years? I think in 20 years, I will be ever expanding. I will be ever on that process of personal development, learning and growing, learn to love to learn. If you're not learning, you're not growing. If you're not growing, you're dying. That's one of my core values, right? I'm constantly in the process of evolving myself as a human being and expanding who it is that I am and who it is that I can potentially become. So the vision that I have now is going to be different than the vision I have tomorrow, because I will have expanded, one, from this interaction and every other moment that I've had. So it's a continually expanding vision of what I have for the future.
I respect that 100%. I think that,
It's kind of hard to quantify or put
Yeah.
into a picture,
but it's exponential.
exactly.
Like, you could say, I want to be a millionaire, but if
Right.
you learn something tomorrow that allows you to grow exponentially,
Right.
which you will, because
Right.
that's your purpose and
Right.
your passion and your
He's
drive.
got a hella good coach.
My goodness. My good. Another shameless
just
plug. Okay, speaking of shameless plugs, so you have a podcast,
Right.
which we actually were with you when you started.
The first episode.
That's
Right.
right.
My goodness.
Yes.
Thoughts become things.
Right.
So where can people find you social media wise? Where can they listen to your podcast? Where can they watch you drop in knowledge? Where can they hire you as a coach? Plug away.
All right, so Think Tank Podcast, type in alex.think on your Apple Podcasts, and you'll be able to find it. It's the Think Tank Podcast with Alex Think. And so the premise of the podcast is very similar to the Hyperconscious podcast. What's a think tank? A think tank is a incubator that brings people together to facilitate growth, facilitate change, to deliberate over specific topics. Well, my specific topics are spirituality, personal development, basically PMES, right? And people in different arenas have different tactics. How can I reverse engineer their goals, their actions, their lifestyle, so that monkey see, monkey do, I can incorporate them into my life. So that's
With
basically-
caffeine.
With caffeine.
We all had coffees before this, just
We
so
did,
you know.
Yes. That's why we're firing on all
Right,
cylinders
right.
now. Anyway, so yes, that's the premise of the podcast. And then also you can find me at alex.think on Instagram. That's really where I mainly post, but my social game is pretty low right now. I'll be completely honest with you. That's one of the things I'm really trying to amp up. And then also Facebook, Alex Hinkle 24. Other than that, Snapchat, same thing, Alex Hinkle 24. But feel free to reach out to me if you guys have any questions about anything that I talked about on this podcast. And if you want some type of coaching, I am more than willing to open up and have a 20-minute phone call, 30-minute phone call with you to really assess what's your lifestyle like, what's your programming like, and how can we make quick tweaks in your mindset so that you can start seeing results now.
Okay, so say we were going to advertise this podcast and we could only have you saying one thing. We only had like a 10-minute blurb of what you were saying. What is a 10-second thing you would want to leave the listeners with? Something that's a fundamental belief in you, something that you think might help them in their deepest, darkest moments. Like, what is something that you live by that you can share with the listeners before we head off?
In the deepest, darkest moments, I'm going to wrap this up with the same thing I started it with. It's life is like a bow and arrow. It'll pull you back and pull you back, waiting to shoot you off in the right direction. Steady, aim, bullseye. Never stop growing. Never stop expanding. and stay focused on your goals.
Anything from you?
Absolute fire. I just want to say this was an honor, man. I'm so glad you, dude. Honestly, it's amazing when you're chasing your dreams. There are certain things that you can't anticipate. There are certain results you're going after. There are certain things that you cannot anticipate. Alex, you are one of them. It was so awesome to meet you, and now to see you 8 months later expanded so much exponentially. I have no doubt that you're going to change the world. You've changed my life, and I'm hopefully going to change millions and millions of other lives, potentially billions. Keep chasing your dreams, folks. And the last thing I want to say is that remember that Alex is the compound effect of personal development over time. Everything you heard him say is what he practiced in private. So it's what you're doing between the notes that made this podcast episode incredible, and I appreciate you coming on, man.
Thank you. That really means a lot because nobody can see the silence between the notes, and I appreciate you highlighting that I am putting in the work. I am putting in the reps on the back end. I mean, meditating as much as I do and trying to connect to my experience and researching, all of that kind of stuff, getting in the gym 7 days a week, all of that kind of stuff. It really does mean a lot for you guys to highlight the fact that that comes through. So thank you.
That is what this is, man. Pulling back the curtain on what success is, on what making progress is, on what your story is and how it affected your life and your decisions and your experiences. That's what Hyperconscious is.
Fact.
That's what it's all about. Ladies and gentlemen, we hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we clearly enjoyed recording. Up next, we have a very special Small Talks episode on the word expectations that we decided during this episode.
Yes,
so we hope you enjoyed this. We hope you will enjoy that, and we will talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much for listening to another episode of the Hyperconscious Podcast.
Going hyperconscious will absolutely change your life because if you understand why something is the way it is, now you have the power to change it. If you going hyperconscious with us has changed your life in any way, please share this episode with one of your friends because the more people that go hyperconscious, the better this world's going to be for everybody.
And if you would kindly leave us a 5-star review on iTunes, that would help us make more people hyperconscious, and we would be greatly appreciative.
Thank you.
Bye.